Welcome to Politics. I'm Jeronimo Cortina, political science professor at the University of Houston.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus, a political science professor, also here at the University of Houston. Thanks for hanging out with us and talking a little politics on Party Politics. This hopefully will get you ready for your weekend and get you ready to talk about the biggest news, and that's the fact that the legislature is about halfway done. The cotton is halfway to the gin, Jeronimo. But don't be confused about how lull things have been, because things are starting to heat up, and like a spring storm, you're going to see this thing roll in fast and hard and then roll out just as quick. So we're going to talk this week about what to expect for the next couple of months, relationships between the big players, where certain issues are in the field, and just all things that are associated with the legislative circus. So the first thing is give us some context for where we are and kind of why it is the legislature does what they do in such an infrequent basis.
Right. Well, that's in the Texas Constitution, right? And it's this part of the, I guess, Texas foundational political myth that less government is good government. Right. And that's why we meet, or they meet every 2 years for 140 days.
Yes.
Our legislature is a quote-unquote part-time legislature in the sense that they're not meeting every single year for most of the year. And finally, it is a very jam-packed process, right? Because you only have 140 days for the next 2 years.
Yes.
So you have to pack everything. Most of the statistics, like in every legislative session, there are around 10,000 bills or more that are at least introduced. Yeah. More or less, about 7,000 of those bills do not make the cut. So you're talking about between 2,000 and 3,000 bills that actually get voted up and down in the floor.
Yeah.
The process is very simple. It's only 6 steps.
Yes. Okay. Wow. That's it seems surprisingly compact for.
Yes. So they introduce a bill, right? That bill then is referred to a standing committee. Then
and that's about where we are right now, right?
Right.
These bills are going to committees.
Exactly. So that's where we are in terms of the referral. After that, right, for the second half or after the halftime, well, they don't have halftime.
Not quite halftime,
Right.
We're almost at halftime, basically,
Then it's put in the calendar, it's sent to the floor, up and down, and if it passes, it goes to the Senate. The Senate does whatever they want to do, or the other way around. Conference committee, which is basically the House and the Senate hashing out differences. They do a conference report. After the report, they say up and down. If everyone agrees, goes to the governor. If the governor agrees, signs it, becomes a law.
Yeah. And a lot of this obviously is about the politics of it, right? So the process looks simple on paper, but the reality is there's a lot of the kind of political churn around it, right? So I think that Truth Barbecue would be envious of the amount of red meat that's going to go through the legislative process. Maybe we get an endorsement thing, Truth Barbecue, right? I mean, we could work it out. But I think that most Texans are going to need a big bib to keep the meat juice off of them, considering sauce. How much red meat is going to happen. And partly because we know a lot of the policies flow from the politics. And so from the election, there was clear kind of unanimity that the Republicans were in charge, right? And so they're winning big at the state level. They obviously won every big, statewide race. So that definitely put them into good stead. Most of this is led by the big three: the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the Speaker of the House. They're all Republicans, but they're not totally in agreement, right? So there's definitely some divergences there. So I'm interested in sort of how the House and Senate dynamic plays out, because I think that's really interesting. There's also some dynamic between the governor and lieutenant governor on things like how successful the grid has been. Right. But there's certainly enough unanimity there in terms of policy preferences that we're likely to see some of that go. But the sun never sets on the Republican Party empire in Texas, right? Almost like the British Empire of old. It is not the case that it won't go. It will go. And so we're going to talk a little bit about kind of how the Democrats have fared in all of this, right? And pushing back on some of these things. And we're going to talk about some of the big issues. But let's get into that first question. That's about the big three. The relationship between the key players at each institutional level really is meaningful. So give me your sense of kind of how that is played out, and what effect it'll have on like whether legislation goes quickly or at all?
Oof. Well, I think it's a very delicate balance,
Yeah.
right? Because each of them have their own legitimacy, right? Each of them are elected independently from, the general state in case of the Speaker of the House from his district, but then he's elected inside the House. The Lieutenant Governor is not elected by the Senate. That's a constitutional prerogative that he has as Lieutenant Governor, and then obviously the governor elected all over the state. So it's given that they have their own constituency, they have their own mandates, and they have their own political power, they have their own political capital, and obviously there is this tension in terms of advancing their own political agenda.
And then they do have their own agendas, right? I mean, we saw
absolutely.
and have talked about the fact that the lieutenant governor and speaker have kind of come up with their own agenda. The governor is kind of touring the state, trying to drum up support for vouchers, which we'll also talk about. So these things do matter, right? And there's been a lot of tension in the last decade. It's not necessarily a Dan Patrick issue, but Dan Patrick has definitely been a part of it, where the House and Senate have butted heads, right? They have really been very much at each other. And it's partly because the rules dictate this kind of complicated flow of things, so that certain bills have to be done at certain times in order for it to be heard by the chair. And that gets way too into the weeds for like our little show here. We'll save that for class, right? We'll bore our students with that. We won't bore you with that, folks. But the basically the same thing applies, right? Where they have to kind of work through and with each other. And that can be challenging, right? So I think the speaker and the lieutenant governor are basically like political frenemies, right? They have to work together. They have a okay working relationship, but I don't think they're going to be like buying a timeshare together anytime soon, right?
Yeah,
like, it's not that kind of friendliness, right?
Well, but timeshares is like you have your week and they have their week. So
actually, maybe
maybe they would. So
I describe it more like Tango and Cash, right? They're working together the same goal, right? Now that's a deep dive. That is a deep dive into
like Poncherello and Baker, something like that.
Not that good. Not that good. No.
Okay,
they have to ride in tandem. That's
well, absolutely, right? And it's I think it's on the one hand is the political style of each of the Speaker of the House and the Lieutenant Governor. That has to do, very, very important to me. The Speaker of the House, Phelan, doesn't like to get into a lot of the cultural wars. Yeah. I think he has a different feeling of what needs to be done. Yeah. And on the other hand, Lieutenant Governor Patrick likes to get into that political agenda, which, it's his prerogative and, kudos and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But then I think there is the institutional side. Yeah. And the institutional side is Speaker Phelan said, like, wait a minute. Like, by the Texas Constitution, we are a bicameral legislature. Yeah. And that means that you need me as much as I need you. So we're not the little brother, the little sister, or anything like that. We want respect.
Yeah. Just because, I mean, we're on the same footing, right? Like
exactly.
The floors are the same level, right?
Exactly.
So, and I think part of the reason there's this tension is that, like, number one, as you say, there's institutional divide. And Patrick kind of is impatient. He wants his way politically, right? And to his credit, he's moved the party in that direction in a significant way, maybe more than almost any other kind of current elected official, including Greg Abbott. And that's, I think, resulting from the fact that they've got different political constituencies, right? Like, the constituency for Phelan is basically the House, but it's also the kind of more moderate wing of the party, right, who's got to kind of be the brakes on things. And internally, this has been sort of always the norm, right, where the House has always been those brakes. You've had historically, speakers who have said that we should let the members vote their districts. Like, they need to go back and represent people, so they have to make their choices, which means sometimes they have to buck their party. The relationship between the governor and lieutenant governor is interesting, too, because they've never really been together. The last time we actually saw lieutenant governor and governor actually run together was like Perry and Bush when they ran together, because after that, they stopped doing it. It really was kind of an all for myself sort of a deal. And it's not to say they're not going to agree on things, but like Abbott is the more cautious, wizened approach. And so I think that, definitely is his personality. Patrick's more vocal and aggressive. So while Abbott kind of contemplates the blast radius, you see Patrick kind of lighting the fuse. Right? And so, that's why the governor's out kind of stumping support for vouchers, which is going to be a big issue. And Dan Patrick just says, just put it on the calendar. Let's see how it goes. He's got the votes, there's no question, but the votes necessarily aren't there in the House. Yeah. Right. And so that's going to be an interesting question. But let's talk about some of those things, because we talked weeks ago about the role of the lieutenant governor in trying to push legislation. This week, one of the sort of things that happened was that he put SB 2 onto the intent calendar. So by the time you're hearing this will be something that the Senate's already taken up. SB 2 is the first of many controversial bills. This bill in particular increases the penalties for fraudulent voting. So this is definitely a kind of first step at this. Now, we know historically Patrick's moved quicker than the House. That's just his nature, but also the fact that he controls the Senate matters. I think that's really thrown a lot of things into frenzy. So that's how we know it's halftime, right? Like, you know what I mean? The score is close.
Right.
And so we have Rihanna coming out, right, to do something big. If that happened, I think you get a lot more people paying attention to the ledge.
True.
But what do you make of Dan Patrick's sort of approach, right? His priority bills are pretty conservative, right? Reflecting the fact that he is basically governing often from the right for the right. So what is your take on kind of how that's going to settle out in the next couple of months?
Well, look, I think that, the more that you are focusing on these very ideological, very partisan issues, the more potential unintended consequences you're going to create.
Yeah.
So the state is moving, perhaps in these big urban areas, to different, I guess, more moderate stance on politics. Also, people are tired.
Yeah.
People are tired of hearing all this stuff, right? When, perhaps they have, individual economic problems, right? Paying the mortgage, like thinking about, well, now I need to buy a new car, and cars are super expensive.
And the roads are all chewed up.
Exactly, chewed up,
my kids'
this and
schools are
that.
underfunded.
It's like you get into a car accident and the insurance takes 3 months, right, to respond. And all those things is like, okay. And in the meantime, you're talking about something that in reality doesn't exist, like electoral fraud. It's like, I don't know.
Or critical race theory, which people may object to in some generic way, but like specifically that's like unclear that this is like the top priority, right?
Exactly. So I think there's those issues, right?
Okay.
Issues about infrastructure, issues about that people really perceive every single day.
Yeah. And I want to ask you this because like I think you're right about Patrick's sort of approach, right? I mean, he clearly has been, the kind of vanguard of the right. And like I said, he's governing more or less, from the right for the right. And that's been a kind of consistent thing. And now he's effectively controls the Senate in a way that the rules allow him to do. He's changed those rules to give himself more power, to reduce the need to be able to get more Republicans to support him, or bipartisan legislation. 20 years ago, the rules had that you had to have 2/3 of members agree. That's interesting because that presented really bipartisan legislation.
Absolutely.
That number has been whittled down, to now basically a simple majority. And that's changed the dynamic in the Senate. And Patrick really is the reason that happened. So, I suppose you say if you're a hardcore, craven institutionalist, you say, good job, because that's what you're supposed to do, right? As a leader, you try to get your policies pushed forward. But Phelan, the speaker, has taken a different approach. Now, this week, he announced a couple of priority bills that complemented ones that came out last week. So some of them include, for instance, infrastructure development such as broadband, internet, and water policies, speeding up cities and counties processing for new construction approval. Like, I'm yawning internally because these things are so boring. They don't excite the base, but they are the things that basically that the people want, right? That Texas needs. And so my question to you is like, is this going to be a benefit to Phelan? Like in this grand scheme where like they're going to have to jockey for position here, do you see the House as being able to kind of overcome Patrick's insistence that the whole chambers move on this kind of conservative policy?
Right, because look, I think this is very simple in terms of human behavior, right? If you go onto the internet and you are living in a rural community,
don't do it.
Right.
The internet is a cesspool, right?
Exactly. So it's like, I want internet, right? Because education, commerce, etc., 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 right? And then you were telling me, well, we banned CRT.
Okay.
Well,
you're not going to know because you can't get on the internet.
Exactly. Right. So
maybe that's part of it.
It's like, you have to be able to show that you are governing. And I think that not only in Texas, but across the nation, the Republican Party is not being, or paying special attention to the act of governing.
Yeah.
You know, the famous ethos of the Republican Party: small government, cut red tape, allow small businesses to thrive, etc., etc. Those things were very important for many Americans, right? And now you're shifting into a very, I guess, concentrated part of the Republican Party. But the rest is going to say, like, okay, I need internet, I need water infrastructure, because we're going to have problems of water, right? We have said that before many, many times.
Big problem,
And when farmers, when ranchers are going to be scrambling for water, like they're scrambling, for example, in California, in Nevada, that's going to be a very, very important issue.
It's a really good point. And I think at some point there'll be a reckoning where the Republicans start to realize that they've underfunded the state. And then it'll start to look like these sort of places that companies are moving from to move to Texas, right? Like land is cheap, regulations are low, workforce is strong. That's always been the sort of Texas model, right?
Until it's not.
Until it's not, right? And because you stop investing in it. And
exactly.
so I think that's the long-term worry. Like, that's not going to affect the 24 election or 6 or 8. But like, you're talking about a kind of long-term issue here.
But I'm not so sure because, companies and people that make investments and that kind of stuff, they just don't look, 2 years or 3 years from now. They're going to see, do we have enough power? Do we have enough, capacity to increase our production based on the electric grid?
Totally.
Do we have enough water? Do we have enough human capital? If I cannot get human capital, an educated workforce locally, and I have to import them from state X, just not to name, to be,
right?
So no. I'm still planning some in vacation, so I don't know.
You won't be. Oregon won't be
exactly
accepting your.
So exactly my application to go. The important here is that if I'm bringing human capital, that is the most important thing in a company. What am I doing here?
Yeah. And I think in this case, then Phelan is kind of representing the House in that way. And I think that, he's standing up institutionally for his members who are all pushing these issues, which we've mentioned
and Phelan is bringing Democrats, right?
Yeah.
He's bringing them into the equation because when you say water infrastructure, there's no Democrat that can say, oh, no, like we don't want that kind of stuff. Broadband. Let's bring broadband.
Let's do it,
he's bringing also Democrats into the fold. I mean, obviously, there's going to be a little bit of red meat here and there. But overall, it's like I'm bringing people in and look, I'm showing you how to govern. And that's also part of the, I guess, Texas myth, right? That is like we can work together.
Yeah. And that's always been the way that it's worked in the House. And not always perfectly, but like generally. I think this is going to be a session where like the House takes its time, and that's going to infuriate Dan Patrick. And so that's going to be a major kind of determinant of this battle. On that point, actually, the fact that the state has so much money. Now, we talked about this like one of our very first episodes ever of Party Politics, and that was the state is rich.
Right.
$33 billion with a B, ready to be able to be spent on things. Everyone's fighting for their efforts. Both the House and Senate tentative budget had about $15 billion for tax cuts. Now, actually, one thing that happened last week was that we saw competing proposals come out. So Speaker Phelan's got his proposal. Speaker Patrick's got his, Dan Patrick, Lieutenant Governor's got his proposal. So not surprisingly, they are fighting about it. So the Phelan proposal basically takes a certain direction, and that is to place a cap on how much your appraisal can increase. So it's 10% right now of an increase over last year. Phelan wants to reduce that to 5%. So that's the way that he wants to do it. Now, Dan Patrick basically says that lowering the appraisal cap won't work. Now, keep in mind, he once supported that, but he's gone a different direction. And I understand financially, I think, how this works. What they want to say, basically, is that all you're doing is moving taxes around. They say the appraisal cap only helps people who are going to buy their home now and keep it forever. People who are new buyers or renters won't benefit from that presumptive tax cut. So that's what the left and right say, actually. You saw every Texan come out. You saw TPPP, the conservative think tank, come out saying that this is going to be a problem. So politically, it's going to be an issue. It's a thorny knot to unravel because not only is it complicated generally to do this, but also the fact that they're fighting about it and unsure of kind of which way to go because Patrick wants to go the route of, reduce or increasing your homestead exemption is going to create some friction. So what's going to happen? How are we going to get our tax cut, basically? What's it going to look like?
I have no idea. and I mean, so basically, if you follow the Senate plan, a household is going to get around $200, right?
Okay.
On that. On the other hand, when you cut the cap to half, to 5%, you're expanding that also, right, to small businesses, right? And you're expanding to a certain extent the base that you would tend to benefit. In every single public policy, there's going to be cons and pros, right? And these may be in terms of how that tax is going to be allocated. We have is a tax system that is not fair by definition, right? In many cases, more affluent individuals spend less of their money on basic necessities, and
proportionately
proportionally speaking, right? So having that, at the end, you might end up at having the same amount. And again, it's an issue of $200 per household on average, right? Based on the median value of a household. Of a house.
So it's not so much a cut as a cap, right? Which I think is fair for people because they want to see a limitation of that.
Right.
And so no matter how you slice it, it's going to get us there. It's just a question of financially what that looks like today and tomorrow, right? Because as we said weeks ago, talking about what a budget with a reduction in the homestead exemption or increase in the homestead exemption would look like, it's complicated for the future because it puts a structural hole in the budget, right?
Correct.
And if it's the case that they reduce the sales tax like they've talked about possibly doing, and the governor has embraced, maybe it's the case that that'll also create a different kind of structural problem. So,
and the issue is also people that rent.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
always a thorny problem because it's hard to find tax relief for them, right? And that's why the sales tax would do, but it's expensive.
Well, but then when you're looking at all these things, you cannot watch or you cannot think about it. But for example, because if you remember correctly, that I know you do because you're very smart.
It's just, it's all steel trap in there.
If you remember correctly, part of how they want to fund education savings account, school vouchers, school choice, school freedom, or whatever other name to talk about the same thing, is through a reduction of property taxes and using sales tax, right, to fund the hole that you would have in property taxes reduction. But when you put everything together, right, you're throwing or you're making a cocktail that has chocolate cake, jalapeno, tequila, this and that, etc., etc.
That's a good Christmas right there. Let's go.
So you don't know how it's going to taste, and at the end, what is going to balance? Because on the one hand, you say, well, we cut here, and when we're going to use here, but then you have another proposal that said, but wait, we want to cut here as well.
And so let me just bring in some more spicy Szechuan chicken to this.
A couple of drops of the spicy hot salsa that you make. So
okay, it's good. That's hot stuff.
The red one.
That's hot. Okay, that's hot stuff. It's dangerous. Let me add some more to it though. And that is that the legislature is also considering changing how they fund the education formula. Basically, right now they give schools money based upon attendance, whereas they want to do it in a more fair way, which is to give it upon enrollment, right?
Exactly.
Which is a slight difference, but means millions of dollars for some school districts. So that means that the state's going to have to pay millions of dollars, right? And so that's one thing that's definitely worrisome. Vouchers are going to be a big issue. Like we said, the governor's out trying to make some hay for this, trying to get low income and rural areas to join on this. I think he might have some success at this, so that'll be interesting to note. But I want to talk about some controversial bills because there's been a bunch of them. Let's do a lightning round here. Here's one question. That is that one of the members, Brian Slate, introduced a bill to allow Texas to vote on whether it would secede or not, the so-called Texit vote. Lightning round, going to pass or not pass?
Absolutely not. It's illegal. No, it's not going to pass.
It doesn't mean it won't pass.
Right, yeah. No.
But it can happen. There's also been a lot of controversy about drag shows we've talked about. There's been controversy about limiting classroom lessons for sexuality or LGBTQ information, expanding anti-discrimination protections, restricting college sports teams from allowing transgender athletes to be on the team. Are these going to pass? What's your read? Is it a conservative session like that or not? Yes and no, because we have $33 billion that people are going to be more focused on. And I think that, there's a likelihood that some of these bills are going to pass. They're not going to pass the entirety, and they're not going to pass, as written or as introduced. So I think that everything is going to be
as you say, stopped at the House. And the House maybe is just going to wait. The question is if we're going to go to a special session.
Okay. What's a bill you're watching you think that needs to be on people's radar?
Well, I think, all the bills regarding school finance overhaul, I think those are extremely important for every single person in the state of Texas. So I'm looking very closely at that. I'm also looking at how some of these other bills in terms of abortion exceptions and the expansion of Medicaid are going to fall down at the end in the legislature. What about you?
I'm watching this bill about banning Delta 8, Delta 9. There's a variety of THC that's legal federally because of the laws that Congress passed, but some states have banned it, including Texas considering banning it. So that'll be of interest to me because a lot of veterans use that, and so they're going to be pushing hard for it. Okay, so what expect? Last thing, the last 3 months, what's going to happen? Big predictions.
Well, I mean, we are going to expect the unexpected.
Okay, good. Yeah, I like that.
All right.
I think a couple of things. I think number one, that fight over taxes will dominate, right? This process we've talked about is going to suck up a lot of oxygen. And I think if Democrats are smart, they can take advantage of that to slow down some of the social legislation or even possibly push it off to the next session. And I think vouchers passes in some form. I don't know what form, but I think that there's enough consensus that they'll get that there.
So, Brandon, for this week, this has been the Halftime Report brought to you by us. So we'll continue next week.
Hey, thanks for watching Party Politics, and thanks to everybody at Houston Public Media for making the show look awesome.
I'm Jeronimo Cortina.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus. We'll see you next week.